Relax and listen to the voice.
Hello everyone, we're back again with more stories. We're changing it up for this upload, and we decided that we would highlight some of the true horror and scary stories from Reddit. If you're watching any other narration videos and you've been paying attention, there's a lot of scary stuff on Reddit. We will also be listing the author's handles inside of this video description. And with that, here we go. This is something that happened to me when I was in my previous house a while back. It all started one night when me and my family returned home from bowling, and my father said that he had left the back door unlocked by mistake. But luckily, it appeared as if no one had broken into our house. Oh, how wrong we were. Every third night after that, I'd hear this tapping noise in the floorboards under the carpet, ever so slightly. I usually ignored it as I thought it was just a pipe from the boiler vibrating against the floorboard. When it came to me playing my video games, I'd find my controllers out of place or the game stack shuffled up. Back then I was kind of a geek. I would organize my games in an A through Z alphabetical type order. But anyway, I just shook it off because at least then I spent my time reorganizing instead of only gaming all the time. Sometimes I'd hear these whispers of my name at a very low pitch, which I thought was my brother playing tricks on me, so I just kept replying, "Go back to bed, you crap stain." One night my father went into my room and he said, "Don't tell me this tapping isn't keeping you awake." I replied back with a nod, and so we unscrewed the floorboards, and then we saw something that you would never, ever want to see in your entire life. Underneath the floorboards, there was a homeless person with the bloody bones of an unidentified dead animal. He was staring directly at my dad with a toothless grin. He pulled himself up out of the floorboards and he charged at my dad with a rusty knife. Luckily, my dad was trained in the ways of Krav Maga, and he disarmed the homeless man easily and knocked him out cold. In the meantime, I called the police, and in a panic I explained the situation. A police cruiser arrived at our house in under 10 minutes, and the officers came inside and arrested the homeless man. Not much longer after that, we had a message that came through the mail saying that the arrested man was wanted for repeated home entries and also was a suspect in the murder of an elderly woman. It said that the crimes that he was being charged with, if convicted, would land him a life sentence in a maximum security prison. I feel like we all got very lucky after that, and I'm lucky to be alive to tell this story. I'm telling you all this because I need to share it, but I'm gonna change the names. In the year 2009, me and my best friends, Rufus, Jermaine, Ava, and Christina, and her two siblings, Jenna and her brother Devon. Well, we would always hang out at this old abandoned house, like every other Tuesday, and I would always make sure that the doors and windows were locked every time we left. One night, it was me, Ava, and Rufus, and we decided to go to the abandoned house, seeing as how all the other people in our friend group were busy. We never really go at night, but since we were bored, we went up around 10 p.m. We would always chill upstairs and play card games and, having like little drinking parties and stuff like that. A few hours passed and I heard a noise coming from downstairs. Ava and Rufus had their headphones on as they were watching a movie on Rufus's portable DVD player. So I decided to go investigate, and I told him I'd be right back. But as I started walking down the hallway and towards the steps, I felt... I can't even describe it. I felt like I was being watched. And as I was on the way into the kitchen, I started to tremble with fear. I looked over, and I saw that the basement door was wide open. But the question in my mind was, who in the hell opened it? I know it wasn't my other friends, because Christina, Jenna, and Devon went to Baltimore, Maryland for a 2-week family reunion, and Jermaine was in Dallas, Texas for a convention. Like an idiot, I yelled, "Hello, is someone down there?" I got no answer, so for some reason I decided to walk down the stairs, and every single step that I took, my heart kept pounding faster and my palms started sweating. I finally made it to the bottom of the stairs, and I looked around the whole basement, and I saw nothing. I start to make my way back up the stairs, and I turn around to take one last look, and this is the part that made me turn white as a ghost. As I was facing the opposite direction, I hear and feel breathing on the back of my neck. I turned around, and I saw a man staring at me with the creepiest look on his face. His eyes were wide open, and then he gave me the most disturbing grin. I screamed and I ran up the steps, and as I was running, I could hear him chasing after me. I kept screaming bloody murder. I managed to get up to the top of the stairs, shut the door, and I locked it behind me. But I could hear the man on the other side. It sounded like he was trying to knock the door down. Ava and Rufus heard the commotion, and they came down, and they were getting ready to ask me what was going on. But as soon as they saw that the door was being pushed open violently, they ran out the door, and so did I. We ran as fast as we could, and we didn't stop running. 7 years have passed since that night, and none of us have ever gone back to that house. Honestly, I still have nightmares about it to this very day. This happened to me about 7 years ago. I'm 20 years old now. My parents were away from home for a family emergency. I'm the only child, and whenever my parents left and I stayed home, I usually didn't get scared. It was the third night by myself, and I was playing video games and eating junk food, and then I hear a knock at the door. I was wondering who it would be knocking at our door at a late hour like this. I turned and I looked, and I could see a man peeping through the small glass windows surrounding the door. I could hear him yelling. It sounded like he was saying, "I'm really hurt. Please let me come in." As I walked closer to the door, I shouted, "What's wrong?" It sounded like he said that he had broken his foot. Obviously, I was startled by the situation, but it also felt like it was kind of weird to me. I asked him how he broke his foot, and he told me he was taking a walk around the neighborhood, and that he had tripped, and his foot had simply landed in an odd way. He was begging me to let him in, and screaming, and then he started to get aggressive, and telling me that if he gets really hurt, or if this doesn't heal, he's gonna sue me for not helping him. That freaked me out, but not in a horror movie sense. I thought I could be in trouble or something. I didn't open the door, but I told him I would call an ambulance for him, and I told him that he was going to have to wait outside. Almost immediately after I said that, I heard him yell louder than he had done before, and he said, "If you don't let me in, I'll slit your throat and cut all your body parts in half." As soon as he said that, I backed away from the door, and I grabbed my dad's shotgun, which he keeps on the highest shelf in the kitchen, and then I grabbed the phone to call the police. From the kitchen, I yelled as loudly as I could, and I told the man that I was calling the police and that they were on their way. I heard him laugh and he started to yell, saying, "They won't make it in time. They're not gonna make it in time." While he was saying this, I could hear him beating on the door and walking around the house to the other windows, and it sounded like he was trying to break the dining room window open. I peered over the kitchen countertop, and I could tell that by the way he was hitting the window, it looked like it was going to break at any time. I quickly ran upstairs into my room, and I decided to hide under my bed. I did call the police, and the operator told me that they would be there in a couple of minutes. As soon as the operator said that, I heard the window break. He must have found a big rock in the front yard or something. I could hear him down there, walking around, mumbling and checking all the rooms. And then I heard him coming up the stairs. He first went to my parents' bedroom. I could hear him in there checking and opening the closet doors. And then I heard him trying to open my door. From under the bed, I gripped the shotgun tightly in my hand, and I waited for him to break down the door. I could hear him out there. It sounded like he was kicking it or slamming into it as hard as he could. With just a couple more blows, he'd broken the door frame, and the door fell down. I could see his feet, and it seemed like he was frantically roaming around the room. I watched his feet move as he tried to open the closet door in my room, which I had purposely locked to confuse him. As he jiggled the knobs on the closet, I heard him say, "I know you're in there." Laying there under the bed, panicking and scared out of my mind, I was wondering if I should shoot him in the legs or try to roll out from under the bed, sneak past him, run back down the stairs and out of the house. In my scared and confused state, I'd forgotten that I was under the bed. I lifted up a bit and I hit my head, which made a very loud noise. I focused back on the man, and I could see that he'd quickly turned around. He said, "Oh, trying to be sneaky with me then, huh, you little smartass?" As soon as he finished that sentence, I heard police sirens coming fast. The man then said, "Oh, you got lucky this time, but you won't the next." Something came over me, and at that point, perhaps I was feeling emboldened by hearing the sirens of the police cars, but as he turned to leave, I reached out from under the bed, and I grabbed his right foot, surely catching him off guard and making him fall very hard to the ground. I was holding on to him with all my might when I heard the police smash the front door open and announce their presence. I began screaming immediately, telling them that I was upstairs and that the man was here. I could hear the officers pounding up the stairs, and within seconds they had jumped on top of the man and subdued him. I squirmed out from under the bed with my shotgun, and as I looked up, I saw that the police were now pointing guns at me. I pushed the shotgun aside, and I quickly explained everything, and they understood that I was the one who had called. Some point after all this had occurred, the officers told me that they had found the man's van parked in front of my house. Inside of his van, he had many sharp knives, rolls of duct tape, a camera, and a couple different lengths of rope. I couldn't even imagine what he would have done to me if I hadn't thought to lock that closet door. The police called my parents and they told them what had happened, and my parents returned home 3 days earlier than they had planned. As soon as my mom saw me, she hugged me tighter than she had ever done so before, and so did my father. A little while later, my mother started talking about the man who broke into the house. I think she was only bringing this up to give me some sort of reassurance. But anyway, she told me that the man had been sentenced to 15 years without a chance of getting paroled. We moved from that house about a month after that, and regardless of that, I still have a lot of nightmares about it. I feel like it's taken me a long time to get back to normal, and my parents never again left me alone for a single night until I moved out of their house. Where I live now, I have 3 guns in my house, just to be extra safe, in case anything like that ever happens again. Just to start off, this story didn't happen to me. It happened to my mom. The other night, I was just scrolling around on another spooky reader channel when I saw a video called Creepy College Stalker Stories, and that title immediately caused me to remember something that my mom had once told me. I was a lot younger at the time that I heard this, probably about 12 or 13, so I didn't think that much of it. My mother is now 55 years old, and I'm currently 17. And now that I come to think about it, her story is a lot creepier than I first thought. I don't recall what caused her to start telling me about it, but anyway, here it goes. Let me start off first by saying that at the time of this story, my mother was going to college at Texas Tech. She was getting a law degree, and I forget which year she was in. One night, my mom was walking back from her tennis team's practice, thinking that she was all alone. There was no one on the streets, and the streetlights were on. At one point, she started to suddenly feel uneasy and decided to take a glance behind herself. What she saw then made her become very wary. There was a tall, large man walking behind her, just a few meters away. I recall her mentioning that it wasn't strange to see another young adult walking around at night, but this person didn't seem very young. Judging by the man's build, she estimated that he was around 30 to 50 years old. It definitely wasn't one of the college professors, since most of them aren't out and about at that time of the night. And according to her, most of the professors that she knew of were much shorter than this man was. Just to double check that this was just a normal pedestrian and not some creeper, my mother decided to pick up the pace. So here she is, speed walking down the street. A loud sound of shoes hitting the ground behind her caused her to turn around just in time to see that the tall man was now sprinting towards her. Trying to get the hell out of there, my mom booked it. Due to her being very athletic back then, she managed to stay a good 5 to 7 meters ahead of the guy. He was quite fast as well. As the chase continued, my mom took a sharp turn around the corner and she ran into her apartment building. Her apartment was on the ground floor, where she quickly unlocked the door, ran inside, and locked it behind her. My mom didn't turn on any of the lights in hopes that the man wouldn't suspect that she was in there. Next to her front door, there were 2 large windows with see-through curtains. As my mom stood in there, peeking through the window, she saw the man approaching her apartment. Thinking quickly and reacting out of fear, my mom purposefully fell to the floor and shuffled next to the wall, laying there still, so in case he were to look in, he wouldn't see her. And that's exactly what he did. Apparently, his shadow could be seen through the curtains as he leered inside of the windows. According to my mom, the guy stayed there for what seemed to be like 20 or 30 minutes before eventually backing away. She heard a strange sound at her front door, and then she realized a piece of paper had been shoved under it. My mom didn't get up until she knew for a fact that the man was indeed gone. Once she got up, she cautiously looked around to make sure that the man was gone. At this point, she decided that he had definitely left. Feeling relieved that the guy had left, my mother decided to see what was on the piece of paper. The piece of paper was blank with a few words written largely in the middle, and those words read, "A hard man is good to find." Apparently, this creep had reverted an old saying, "A good man is hard to find," to that. Yeah. Well, my mom went to the police the next day and she filed a report. They took her statement and they took the note, and they said that they would keep an eye out. I don't recall if she said that they had ever caught the guy or not. I guess the world will never know. I was on a camp, and I hate camping, but I was the leader of the Boy Scouts, so I had to. I brought my laptop to entertain me, and when I got there, I set up the main tent, when all of a sudden, one of my friends named Anthony, another leader, came up, and we started joking about when a gray blur ran across the field that made up the campsite. We both waited until every scout was there, and then we said the rules and began cooking our food. Now this was survival camp. The scouts collected firewood, and I lit the fire, and we started cooking rabbits, when all of a sudden, one of the campers screamed that there were two bright eyes staring out of a tree. Then I did something I regret. I yelled, "Good joke, now get the hell out of there." My friend Anthony asked me to calm down, and he aimed his flashlight at the tree, and we saw that strange gray blur again. After about 1 more hour, it was time to go to sleep, so we showed the scouts to their tents, and we moved on to our own. I opened my laptop to get some work done when I heard a blood-curdling scream that caused me to panic and run outside. Once out of the tent, I looked around and I saw a group of scouts running towards me from their tent. As I looked over their heads, I could see a pair of bright shining eyes staring at me from the side of the tent. When I saw that, I immediately got the chills and I felt my stomach tighten up. I grabbed all of the scouts and I ushered them into the main tent, where I tried to calm them down and I asked them what they saw. They were all so scared, and one of them answered, "We're not sure what we saw." I asked them for any details or any description, as I'm trying to figure out what we might be dealing with here. The only thing they said was that they saw a large gray shape. From behind me, I heard Anthony yell, "What the fuck are you playing at?" which startled me, and as I turned around, I saw that Anthony was facing the tent, and once again, as I looked past him, I saw a large, gray shape turn around, and it gave an inhuman screech before running off into the woods. Anthony then came running back into the tent, and we all sat there, as quiet as possible, trying to get the scouts to calm down enough in order to quiet their crying and yelling. Anthony and I stayed awake all night that night, and in the morning, when we saw the first rays of sunlight, we had all of the scouts group together and pack up their stuff so we could move out. And as we were hurriedly walking away from the site, I took a chance on looking behind me one more time, and I saw a gray blur moving at the edge of the woods. None of us know what we actually saw. Does anyone know what the hell that gray thing was? When I was 5, I lived in BC before my parents divorced. My mom moved back to Edmonton to be closer to family and friends. What happened was, we didn't really have a place to stay, so my aunt and my uncle decided to take us in until we had bought a home of our own. Me and my brother were forced to sleep in the basement, in a very large open room where our aunt and uncle stored all of our cousins' toys. My cousins are both girls, and at this point, I was a 5-year-old, very petite boy, just about skin and bones really, and my younger brother was a plump and chubby little 3-year-old. Neither one of us liked the basement due to the windows on the outside of the house that showed about a 1-foot by 2-foot space and looked outside towards the tree line. Most of the time, my brother and I would look outside during the winter and see deer and coyotes and occasionally a rare moose or two. One day during the night, my brother said that he saw something outside the window that was white and foggy looking. This scared my brother, and as I noticed how scared he was, I started to get scared pretty badly. He and I stayed in the room with our mom that night. Over the next 6 months that we lived there, more and more creepy things occurred. One example would be one of those old-fashioned spring-loaded rocking horses that my cousins loved to play on, which was a toy that my brother and I would avoid like the plague. This thing with no one on it would rock by itself during the day and during the night, and it scared all of us kids half to death, to the point that our parents decided to throw it into the garbage. Another creepy occurrence was when we had one of those super old McDonald's Finding Nemo toys, which you had to squeeze really hard to even make it talk. Well, the creepy thing is, we put it in the basement washroom in the bathtub for me and my brother to play with when we went to have a bath. The screwed up thing is that it would go off during the night repeatedly, And this scared my mom as well, because she could think of no explanation as to why it would go off only in the night instead of all day long. In her opinion, if it went off all day and all night, then that could be explained by a software issue or a faulty battery or something. But nope, it only went off at around midnight and until around 5 or 6 a.m. Now this is just a tiny part of the story of that house. Here is the creme de la creme of the shitstorm. It happened when I had turned 6, and it was on my birthday, and I actually remember this vividly. I plainly remember seeing someone standing in the corner of the room that no one other than the little ones in my family could see, including my cousins, my brother, and all of my friends who came to my birthday party at the Acreage. One moment he wasn't there, and then another he was. Finally, all the kids at the party started crying and pointing to the corner where we could see the man, and all the adults wandered over to the corner where we saw him, and my mom lost her shit, because as she walked over, she hit a cold spot that she said chilled her to her bones. Multiple parents experienced this as well, and soon after that happened, almost everyone at the party, except for close family, decided to leave. This event happened to me about 2 years ago, so I'm sorry if I don't have everything on point. It was a few months after my 15th birthday. To give some background about the situation and about me, I was about 5'9" at the time, and the previous school year I had done cross-country and wrestling as my sports. Now don't take this the wrong way. I was one of 2 95-pound wrestlers on my team, which meant being the second smallest kid on the team. So as you could assume, I wasn't the scary type. Also, my little brother and I were raised Mormon, even though we don't go to church now. So due to this fact, he and I were extremely sheltered from the real world, especially because we grew up in the mothership of Mormonism, aka Utah. To give you an idea, I did not have any idea about drugs before I moved to California. I didn't know what terms such as pussy, cunt, or other such terms even meant. And now that you understand a little bit about me and my little brother, let's get into the story. So it all started as a friendly road trip going from Utah back to California. It was me and Jake, my little brother, who's 3 years younger than I am, Zach, my stepdad, Buck, my step-grandpa, and Sven, my step-grandma. Buck was driving with Sven in shotgun, Jake and Zach in the middle row, and me in the very back with all the luggage. After a long day of driving, we found a hotel to get a discount at in Mesquite, which is around Las Vegas. We stopped, parked the car, got our room keys. Zach, Jake, and myself would be in one room, and Buck and Sven would be in the other room. After we got there, we all took our stuff into our rooms, and me and Jake wanted to go down for a swim because the hotel advertised their pool, and it looked awesome. My stepdad Zach graciously said yes and told us when to come back from the pool, and we agreed. This is when I should tell you that neither me or my brother had a cell phone. All I had was a second-generation iTouch to tell the time. So when we get down there, we go into the pool a bit, and then we get into the hot tub. Currently, there are 2 women in the hot tub. Their names for this story will be Megan and Annie. Megan was a mother, and her 2 to 3 children were playing in the pool. They were roughly around the age of me and my brother. Annie was a lady who seemed to be in her 30s, but for some reason, she looked like she had lived on the streets her whole life. But none of that had kicked my alarms on, being my sheltered self. Looking back on it now, as a 17-year-old, with everything I've learned, she was 100% on something, and I mean something hard, like crystal meth or heroin or something. My little brother and I get in, and we soon join the conversation between Megan and Annie. Annie was the one who pulled me in, and Jake got pulled into it by her as well. She started off asking how our day was going, and questions like that, and soon she started to ask where we were coming from, and where we were going, and why. And this is the point that I want to say that an alarm started to go off, but I still just told her everything, clearly not thinking that anything was wrong. A little bit later, Megan was talking to Jake, and Annie and I were listening, when I glanced over at Annie, and Annie looks at me and says something along the lines of, "You know, boy, it's very rude to look at someone's boobs without asking them." After she says this, I'm like, "What do you mean?" And then she continues and says something like, "Yeah, I know that they're nice, and I can understand why you're looking at them, me being older and all." At this point, even though I was sheltered, I'm like, "Holy crap, lady, what is wrong with you, and what are you even talking about? I'm only like 15 years old. What in the heck?" At this point, Megan leaves and takes her kids back to her room, so it was just me, Jake, and Annie. Annie then proceeded to say something along the lines of, "Hey, you want to come out to my room? I have something really cool up there," or something along the lines of that. I can't remember exactly what she said, but Jake and I were interested and sheltered, so even though there were some weird things said prior to that, we followed her. As Annie's walking us over to her room, we get to a point to where we have to go up some stairs, and then out of nowhere comes Megan. She looks over to Annie and says, "Hey, they'll wait down here with me while you get it." Surprisingly, Annie complied with that and walked up the stairs to her room to get whatever it was. As soon as Annie entered her room and the door shut behind her, Megan turns to both of us and says, "You need to be careful around people like this. Run back to your room as fast as your legs can carry you. I'll go have a talk with Annie." Right when I heard that, everything clicked in my head. Stranger danger. And then me and my little brother get the heck out of there and run back to our room, freaking out, and we lock the door. The whole night we were afraid that she would find us, so, as you could assume, I didn't sleep at all that night. Looking back on it now, that situation could have led to me never seeing my family again, being assaulted, being killed, or many other things. To say the least, I owe my life and my brother's life to Megan, and I'd like to thank her deeply for that. Everything in this story really happened. It all started when I moved in with my sister into her new house. I was given the smallest room, and that room had a small door on the wall. I never went in there at first, but eventually, curiosity took over me, like I just had to see what was behind that door. When I finally decided to open the door, I grabbed a flashlight because it was pretty dark and I couldn't see. I went a little ways into the little room, and it was filled with cobwebs and looked like no person had been in there in a long time. It was kind of creepy in there, but not bad, until I noticed that the floorboards looked like they had something shoved underneath them. I struggled to pull up the floorboards, but once I did, I could only wish that I hadn't, because what I saw there scared me. It was a piece of paper with a drawing that looked like it was made by a little kid. It was a drawing of a man that was really tall, with no face, and there were words at the bottom of the paper that said, "The man in my window." After I read that, I was scared even more than I was before, and I dropped the paper and I crawled back out of the small room. It didn't seem like I slept well for weeks. Not because of what I saw, but because it felt like I was being watched, or like something bad was going to happen to me or someone else. When that feeling stopped, I decided for some reason to go back into the little room. And when I did, I found more paper under the floor. I found pictures of what looked like a girl that was about 5 years old, as well as an old teddy bear. For some reason, that felt extremely creepy, and after that, I left the room, not wanting to go back in ever again. I tried to calm down and I opened up my phone while sitting on my bed. When I turned my phone off, I stared into the black screen, which acted similarly to a mirror, and I could see a reflection behind me in the window. The reflection in my phone looked like the man in the drawing, and I turned around to see if it was real or not. After a moment of panic, I had to check behind me. I turned around to see if there was something there, and there was a man's face. I started to scream at the top of my lungs until my sister ran into my room and saw the man as well. A short while after that, we moved out of the house and very far away, but I still get the feeling that someone is watching me. And sometimes I feel like I see that man in the distance. And to this day, I'm still extremely scared of what I saw. About 3 months ago, I was babysitting my younger siblings while my parents were out. It was around 8 p.m. and everyone was in the living room watching TV while I was in my room folding the laundry. Note this, my room is located in the back of the house. While I was putting the clothes away, I heard a knock on my window. Without thinking, I opened the blinds a little, and instantly my soul left my body when I was face to face with a pair of wide, hazel-colored eyes staring back at me. I let out an ear-piercing scream, and I ran to the living room to grab my siblings and take them into my parents' room to hide. While my siblings were confused and asking why I screamed, the back door began practically shaking as I could also hear someone banging on the living room windows. My sister was already on the phone with the police, and my brothers were hiding under my parents' bed while I was in the hallway with a long kitchen knife, trying to somehow protect them. Minutes later, the banging and shaking stopped, and I could hear 2 people jumping the front yard gates. The police arrived about 5 minutes later and took our statements. After that incident, my parents got a Belgian Malinois dog from the local shelter named Buddy, who we all loved very much. Just 2 weeks later, I was alone at my house with the dog, getting ready for school, since school started for me at 10 a.m. because the underclasses were taking the state exams, and high school seniors, like me, came to school later. I was feeding Buddy when I hear the front gate shaking, and then I hear footsteps walking quickly next to the house, and again, someone is trying to open the back door. Instantly, Buddy's ears picked up, and he began growling and barking like crazy. I was about to call the police when the person fled. Unfortunately, the police never caught the person, and I soon forgot about what had happened. Then, just a week ago, someone broke into my dad's car and stole the radio. Yesterday, I was up at 7 a.m. cleaning the living room, and I decided to have some light in the house by opening the curtains. And sometime later, I see a truck slowly approaching my house. I hid behind a bookshelf so that the people in the truck couldn't possibly see me through the living room windows. The truck's windows were really tinted, and though I couldn't see, I felt the driver's eyes staring at me, as if he knew where I was at in the house. The truck sped off quickly after that. I honestly don't know what's going on, and I hope that it doesn't escalate any more. So this happened in 2013. This kid named Ricky moved in next door to me when he was around 12 years old. And for lack of a better term, this kid was pretty much a pussy. I remember one time he fell on his skateboard, and he didn't land hard at all, and he was crying his little heart out in my driveway when he was like 16. So fast forward to when this kid is like 18. By then, I'm selling drugs, and he's one of my best customers. By now, he's hanging out with some pretty shady people, which my parents obviously aren't fans of. My parents also didn't know that I was ever selling anything, because I was pretty good at keeping it under wraps. Ricky was clearly a follower. He went from the skater/emo type kid to some wannabe thug, and that was just something he wasn't built for. So, my parents go to the Outer Banks, North Carolina, every year for about 2 weeks, and they ask if I'll come stay at the house while they're gone, which I was excited about because their house is, honestly, much better than the shitty little one-bedroom apartment that I had at the time. So everything was going fine at the house. I had my on and off again girlfriend over all the time, and there was quite a bit of partying going on. I was far from a saint back then. I'll never forget it. It was a Thursday night, and my girl had left a few hours ago. I should say that earlier that day, Ricky had seen me out in front of my parents and had asked for a front. I told him no, considering I never fronted anyone, and in all honesty, I'd been using too much of my own stuff, so I couldn't afford to do that. He didn't like that very much, and we got into an argument, and I pretty much punked him in front of all of his little friends. So by this point, it's like 2 in the morning, and I'm obviously nowhere near tired because of all the drugs. I'm sitting in the dark, and I'm watching Netflix in this den side living room that my parents had in the downstairs, which has a window going outside, which I had open. I paused the TV, and I hopped onto my phone and started texting and checking out Facebook, and then I heard something. It sounded like the screen of the window being split up. I know that sound because I'd snuck out of the house numerous times growing up. So I slowly get up and I watch the windows. I clearly see the screen moving very slowly up through the curtains. So I walk up to the window, and as soon as I move the curtain, at least 3 or 4 people scatter. I run up the front door, but they're all booking it down the street. I knew it was that Ricky kid and his friends. I didn't see him, but I just knew it was them. I didn't call the cops or anything because I wasn't exactly living on the right side of the law. So I just go back inside and I lock everything up, and the rest of the week goes smoothly. I never told my parents about it, and I also never saw Ricky again. I actually called him a few times, but he never answered, which was all the more reason that I thought it was him, and I also thought that he knew that I knew. So, like a month goes by, and I'm watching the news, and Ricky shows up on the TV. Ricky's on the news for murder, which absolutely blows my mind. Ricky and 3 of his friends went out of town, broke into some old couple's home, beat on him and tied him up, and then stabbed them. Then they burnt the house down after they robbed it. They all ended up telling on each other, and he got a lighter sentence of 35 years for testifying against his co-defendants. Kinda makes me wonder, what if I was asleep when they came over and tried to get into the house? What could have happened? A little backstory for myself. I'm a 20-year-old Colombian, being born and raised in Colombia. I've had my share of paranormal, dangerous, and scary experiences. The first one that I can think of was this one, the story that my mom told me once I was old enough to cope with it. She's a fairly religious woman. We all are, after all, Catholic to the core. My mother was born in this tiny little rural town, very deep in the Colombian plains. This deserted part of the country is famous for cattle raising, cocoa plant harvesting, and guerrilla encounters with the military and paramilitary troops. Needless to say, it's a rough place to grow up, especially for a small female like my mom was. They were a rather poor family. My grandfather worked as a Jeep driver instead of cabs since there are no concrete roads, and he worked from dusk till dawn, but not nearly making as much as he needed to support his rather large family. My grandmother took care of the kids. There were 5 in total, 2 girls and 3 boys, and she made ice cream and other stuff to sell around the town. My mom grew up pretty much on her own. My grandmother was apparently a very moody woman and didn't show emotions or love towards anyone, ever. They used to go to church every Sunday, for this is pretty much the only thing you can do around this place, and the rumors of witches, pedophiles, and rapists were an everyday thing, but it somehow never seemed to touch my family or the ones that they knew. One day, my mom was being a little bit difficult. She was only 6, but she remembers going to church and then making a scene at the end because she didn't get a treat on the town plaza. My grandmother, being the short-fused woman that she was, told her to stop it or else she would be taken by the devil for being a bad girl. This was a very common threat back in the day in such a religious society, so my mom neither stopped nor gave any mind to what her mother was saying. And then she saw him. He was a rather tall man, dressed really well, and he was staring at them from the other side of the plaza. People were walking in front of him hastily, as well as others walking hastily around him, but no one seemed to notice him. My mom stopped crying, and the man just smiled and waved, slowly and very candidly. My mom says that she just stared and waved back. She was a 6-year-old after all, and she didn't know what else to do. My grandmother was just glad that she had finally shut up, so she took her home by the hand, almost dragging her down the road. Once there, she gave my mom a rather rough spanking that led to my mother resenting her mother and everything else. That night, when they had all gone to bed, my mom woke up to the sound of a tiny little chick. She loved animals, and she was very used to them, living in such a rural town as that one was, so she thought that maybe she could go outside and catch it and keep it. She got up, put on her flip-flops, and slowly started giving chase to the sound of the tiny chick, not seeing it, but hearing it all the while. She slowly started walking towards the back of the house. These country houses are very poor and usually do not have walls in the back, so you can literally walk out, so that's what she did. It was pitch black outside, but she knew how to handle herself in the dark, and also, she was a pretty fierce little girl, always playing rough with the boys and scratching her knees, so without a thought, she walked out of the backyard. She passed by the giant mango tree that was the limit of her house, and the chick sounded so near that she just had to catch it. She didn't see the chick though, but she kept on walking in the dark, trying to reach it. Sometimes it sounded really close, like right next to her, but sometimes it kind of faded out as if the chick was now like a mile away from her. This kept on for a while until she found herself in a place that she hadn't seen before. She knew her town, and she knew her town well, and at this moment she knew that she was lost. She stood on the middle of a tiny hill, glancing around, hoping that maybe she could see her house from there, but she could not. She then heard it. The chick was so far away again, the sound almost unintelligible now, and then she heard a voice. "Glad to see you again, little Pat. We've been waiting for you." She turned around to see. There was the same man from the plaza, his eyes glaring in the moonlight, the same warm smile, and the black hat, black coat, black vest, and black pants. Next to him, there was a lady that she knew very well, Mrs. Lopez, from the crooked street next to the military base. She looked pretty much as always, just sitting there with her Sunday dress, black as the night itself, a black lace veil on the back of her hair, and her hands crossed on her lap. They were both sitting on a fallen log, which was quite large and also kind of decomposing. My mom saw worms and insects crawling and moving around on it. Just then, she was struck by a smell. It stunk of rotten meat, rotten eggs, and bad breath all at the same time. She immediately felt like throwing up. She doubled over, gasped, and covered her mouth with her hands. As she looked up again, she saw a couple of small shadows moving in the back. There seemed to be more kids there, but she didn't know any of them. This struck her extremely odd, since in her town, everyone knew each other, and they had known each other for years. People didn't just move in out of the blue. But then she noticed something else that was odd. The kids didn't look like kids. The faint moonlight let her see their faces, and they were old and wrinkly, almost like elderly grown-up faces, and also their clothes were strange, kind of black rags that just hung from their bony bodies. And this is when my mother tried to scream. The scream did not come out, but the man started laughing. It was a surprisingly warm laugh, kind of like leaves crunching under your feet. It wasn't menacing, so she took her hand off of her mouth. Then the man looked at her candidly and said, "Your mom told me to come for you. Don't be afraid. We're gonna have a great time." The man then stood up, and that's when the horror hit my mother. His legs until now looked like regular pants, but they weren't. The man was standing tall on two hooves, like a goat, and his hooves were huge, and began stomping the ground as he started moving towards her. Then Mrs. Lopez stood up and opened her mouth. My mother heard the chick again, this time so far away, but coming out of Mrs. Lopez's mouth for sure. My mother took off running the way that she thought that she had come in, screaming bloody murder and crying. She never looked back, but she kept hearing the chick, sometimes far off, sometimes very close, sometimes so close to her that it made her run even faster. She then saw a light flickering through the field. The scarce trees let her see through, and she recognized the shape of my grandfather's broad shoulders and his flashlight circle moving around. She screamed at him, and he stood up, looking around until she finally reached him and hugged him. My grandfather just stood there, holding my mother until she stopped crying and told him all about the man, about Mrs. Lopez, and about the weird kids. He brushed it off, saying that she had had a nightmare and there was nothing to worry about, but she insisted and was instead harshly disciplined for sneaking out in the middle of the night. Dawn rose, and my grandmother sat on the kitchen table and called my mother up. She knew that she was in for it, so she was preparing for the worst beating of her life, but surprisingly, her mother did not have a belt or anything on her hands. She was just sitting there, looking concerned, and asked my mother to sit. My mother complied, and then my grandmother asked her what had happened last night. My mother told her everything, from the moment she heard the chick until she saw my grandfather. My grandmother just sat and listened, wide-eyed, twisting her fingers and cracking her knuckles. When my mom finished, my grandmother told her what had happened. My grandmother apologized to her for calling her a bad girl and threatening to give her away to the devil, and then she began crying and saying that she didn't know better, that she had been raised that way as well, and that was the only way that she knew how to deal with children. My mother was confused. She wondered why her grandmother was apologizing. My grandmother then proceeded to tell my mom that the man in the plaza and in the field was the same man, and he was the devil. This was why she didn't notice his legs up until the very last minute. The devil doesn't show his true nature until it's too late. Fortunately for her, my mom was quick and tough and a little rascal, so we couldn't reach her fast enough. Also, my grandmother said that the lady next to him was called the Pio Pio Witch. Pio Pio being the sound that a little chick makes when an impression is done in Spanish. And my grandmother stated that she knew her well, for she had cursed a friend of hers a few years back. It is known that the witch uses the sound of a small chick to attract kids to her. And when you hear her far, she is actually right next to you. And when you hear her close up, she is likely very far away. My grandmother promised my mom that nothing will ever happen to her again, but told her that she needed to behave better, and also told her to never leave the house without her knowing ever again. Thank you all for listening up until this point. We hope that you've enjoyed these stories, and since some of them were quite scary in a real-world sense, we do wish that you're able to have sweet dreams.